Hey there, everyone. This is Mark O'Donnell, and I'm here today with Debra, our EOS Implementer from New Zealand. Welcome to our little podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Very much looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, Debra, you are in New Zealand. Now, what's the population of New Zealand? It's hard for people in the United States to really get a good view of what your life is like in New Zealand.
So I think if you probably take the smallest state in the US, that's probably the entire population of New Zealand. We've got 5.2 million people.
Oh, all right. Well, that's not too bad. So I live
spread out over a huge geographic area, so that the cities are quite dense, but the rest of it is pretty rural.
Yeah. Awesome. So tell us your entrepreneurial journey. How did you get here? What led you to EOS and becoming an implementer and helping other entrepreneurs?
Sure. So I'll go right the way back to the beginning. I actually had my first business when I was at school, about 13 years old. I was working a couple of jobs, going to school, and also producing little mini notepads and envelopes that I would sell to my fellow colleagues at school, my friends at school. Didn't make lots of money from it, but really got the bug for kind of running a business. But my parents wanted a much more traditional journey for me. So they suggested I should go and do science and get my science degree, and that would help me find a good husband, and I could get married, settle down, and that would be the end of my life. But it pretty much turns out that wasn't quite for me. So I tried that. I stuck at it for a while, and I worked my way up through lots of different businesses. I was in the multinational pharmaceutical industry. I started in sales, moved through into marketing, finally got to a GM role, then went out and started working for private businesses as I suppose we probably call it an integrator these days, but general manager, managing 220 staff, trying to hold everything together, trying to keep the team motivated, inspired, and doing what we did. And then after doing that for several years, I decided I did want to go out on my own and actually run my own business. And I had a real passion for marketing and for educating. And so I started a marketing agency in the tech kind of marketing field. Had a couple of really fantastic years, made money, had all the toys, the cars, you name it. And then basically had a massive train crash, lost it all, didn't keep the eye on the ball. And so went from being a really great organization, making lots of money, to not having an organisation anymore. And so I actually had to go back into corporate world for a few years to rebuild, and did 3.5 years back in corporate world and kind of went, you know what, it's great having a regular income, but I don't get to do the things I really want to do. I hate all the red tape. I hate all the hierarchy. And so I left again, went back out again on my own, and that was probably 20 years ago now, and haven't looked back since. So that's my original kind of journey. I've had many different businesses. I've had a tech business. I've had a marketing agency business. And I actually had an event centre. And I had an event centre in Auckland, which is actually how I came across EOS. So they launched into New Zealand using that event centre. And at the time I was a member of the Entrepreneurial organisation. I kind of went EOS, there must be some linkage here. We knew nothing. We knew nothing about it in New Zealand. I mean, I know in the US it's a very, very popular acronym. People know what it stands for. They know about the traction book. In New Zealand, nobody had any of that knowledge. So I just sort of saw EOS and went, I must find out more. And that was the beginning of my EOS journey.
Yeah, so I've got lots of questions.
Yeah, so sorry, I talk a lot.
No, all totally good. Thinking about that first business. So for my actual question that I have for you first is, did you get a science degree, and in what? Like what type of sciences?
So I'm actually a qualified food technologist as well as a biochemist. Yes, I got my degree. Yes, I actually did get the husband, but sadly that wasn't, after 14 years, that wasn't meant to be. So, so yes, I'm a scientist, but I realized that it just wasn't my passion. I mean, I love people, I love languages, I love travel. Being a scientist in a laboratory looking at little bugs on a plate wasn't going to do it for me.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is my background is in pharmaceutical and biotechnology, and I owned a microbiology lab, doing chem analysis and all kinds of different things, 2 different types of labs, of course. So that's my background too. So that's why I was curious. But
that's fascinating because I'm a food technologist. Microbiology was one of my kind of majors, and so I remember. It wasn't that I can't say I didn't enjoy it, but I just got much more pleasure out of actually motivating, leading, and inspiring people. And so I actually rose up through management quite quickly because I just love that people element of it. But I could never have been stuck in a laboratory day in, day out.
Right, wearing a lab coat and a hairnet, and filling out paperwork.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, if you like being by yourself, it's probably a good spot to be. So you make this transition from a scientist to running a marketing company.
Yep.
I mean, to me, that could not be too. I mean, they're just completely opposite of one another. How did you make the transition from scientist to marketer?
Okay. So if we go a bit more slowly. So as a scientist, I did work in the laboratory. I actually worked, first of all, as a laboratory technician, and then kind of rose up to being the team leader. And I found out I had a really amazing ability to actually get people motivated. So we were making a lot of errors in the laboratory, and I started putting in systems and things in place to actually stop those errors happening, and by rewarding the staff for not making errors. So we're based in Australia. It was always hot over there, and so I would have a little thing for the staff. If they didn't make any errors in the day, I'd buy them all a paddle pop, and that's like an ice cube kind of thing, ice lolly, I suppose you'd call it. And so we stopped making errors. We started turning things around, and I realized that's the part that I really enjoyed. So I actually got offered a job by the opposition laboratory, who wanted me to go and manage their laboratory for them. And I remember going to my boss at the time, and I said to Jeff, "Look, Jeff, I've been offered another job. It's managing a laboratory for a competitor." And he was pivotal in my life. He said, "Debra, do you enjoy working in a laboratory?" And I went, "No, I don't." He said, "So why are you going to go and work for somebody else doing the same thing?" I said, "Because they're paying more money." And I was in my early 20s. Yeah. And he's like, yeah. He said, "But, do you really enjoy it?" I said, "No, I've just told you that." He said, "Well, why are you doing it?" I said, "Because they're paying more money." He said, "Debra, there's more to life than money." And so from that conversation, he said, "Look, I think you really enjoy people. I think that you've got a massive career ahead of you. I don't think it's a laboratory. We've actually got a role for what we call a liaison officer, which is kind of a salesperson who goes out and actually meets with the doctors, solves their problems, talks about our services." And I went, "Okay, that sounds really interesting, but you're way too young. We usually hire women in their mid-50s who are sort of, much more mature. It's going to be a real challenge for me to actually get you through, but I'm happy to go to the board and ask for that if you would like to do it." And I went, "Sounds brilliant." So next thing you know, he fought for the board. I decided to give it a go, and that's how I got into sales. So that was my first role in sales, liaison. And then I got poached by, I think it was originally GlaxoSmithKline, and so I went to work for GlaxoSmithKline as a medical rep. Again, rose up through the ranks, really enjoyed that. Got poached by Roche Pharmaceuticals, went and worked for them. And after 7 years of doing kind of sales, what I realized was that I got tired of sitting in doctors' waiting rooms, waiting for that 5 minutes with a doctor to have a conversation. So I started developing all these little toys and things I could take in to have really interesting conversations with doctors. So I'd take in a basket full of goodies. I'd say, "Pick one of the toys and we'll talk about what that toy means." So they'd pick a car and we talk about, what effect the drug had on your motor neural function. And we'd pick like a toothbrush, and we'd talk about the effect on sleep. And I just had all these different things that I would actually have these conversations with. And so I realized that I just wasn't enjoying sales so much. I was really enjoying just more the engagement, the interaction. And so after 7 years of doing this, I started to do more of the marketing side of things. And then I actually got sacked. It was like one of the biggest things in my career again. I actually got sacked for not going out and seeing enough doctors. I was still the top performing rep, but I wasn't doing it by going and knocking on doors like they expected you to. And so I had to go home to my husband at the time and say, "Hey, look, I've just lost my job, the job that pays us lots of money, and I've got the beautiful car. It's all gone. Haven't got a job anymore." And I decided to go back to school, and I started studying marketing, because I realized what I was doing was actually marketing. And so while I was studying, typical person who can't sit still, I got myself a job as a sales and marketing coordinator, and went to university in the evenings. I was doing marketing. And I think I was 4 weeks into my sales and marketing assistant role, and the sales and marketing manager actually quit. And I said to my boss, "I think I can do this job." He said, "What makes you think you can?" I said, "I just think that I know, I think I can actually add some value." And I wrote him a business plan on how I thought I could add value to the business. Next thing you know, sales and marketing manager of a four-wheel driving company. And then I just kept going on, and from sales and marketing, I went to general management, went to CEO roles, just kept sort of getting further and further up the chain, managing more and more people, doing more of the work that I loved. But I always had this thing about people, and I suppose that's my thing is I love people, I love helping people, and marketing was really about how do we solve people's problems, how do we help people connect with other people in the organisation. So got into the sales and marketing field, got into the tech space because I loved my technology, and just saw a real need for developing marketing solutions in technology.
That's great. And so you start your own marketing firm. Mm-hmm. What happened that it failed? Why did it stop growing and going?
So I think we were probably a little bit early with our technology, and so I recognised this quite early on that we were kind of pushing stuff uphill, trying to get things done. And so we started working with another team, and we realised we had some synergies, and we decided we'd actually merge the two teams together. So I actually bought into another company. We started doing them kind of it wasn't a true buyout, it was a merger and acquisition, like we actually merged together.
Sure.
And this was a great business that was doing work over in the US. Our main client was over in the US. We were building content management systems way before there was WordPress or any of those things out there, doing some really great work for a big luxury travel firm. And it became very clear very early on that we had one major client, so all our eggs were in one basket.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And, we knew that, and so we were working on trying to remove that and trying to build up another revenue stream and another bunch of customers that would actually take away that risk. But in that time frame, the major client actually called us and said, we're not going to be working with you any longer, we're bringing it all back in-house. So I remember jumping on a plane my first time to the US and going over there and talking to the leaders there and trying to convince them that they should not do that and how they should work together. And they gave us a reprieve for a short period of time. But it just wasn't long enough for us to get ourselves back on our feet with the other plans.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure as you're working with your clients now, I'm just wondering how often that trauma comes forward to you as you're working with your clients today.
I don't know that the trauma, I think the wound is healed, well and truly healed. It's more that, and I can talk about it and laugh about it now. I mean, it was not a laughable time at that time, but there's lots of lessons to be learned from that. And I suppose, so we chose to put the company into receivership. It's not something I'd wish on my worst enemy, let alone anybody that I liked. So I guess I learned a lot of lessons. First things were, don't put all your eggs in one basket, do your due diligence before you actually merge and acquire a different company. All kinds of stuff came out of it. And so I think what it gives me is the experience to sometimes ask the right questions. We're not consultants. We don't tell people what to do, but at least I have been on both sides and know what both sides look like. So I can ask, hopefully, some of the intelligent questions.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely seems like I always say that there's no learning outside of failure. And because when you're winning all the time, you're just doing your thing and you don't really learn very much. But then when something doesn't meet expectations, I think that's where really most of the learning comes from. Yeah. And depending on how fast you're in motion, learning and growing and going, that's really where all the things that we can transfer to other people so they can maybe avoid some of the same mistakes and pains and struggles that we have.
Yeah. And that was kind of my motivation, was I didn't want anybody else to have to go through what I had gone through. And like I said, I'm very fortunate. I've had other businesses since then, and we've had other successes and one more great big failure as well. So, there's been, but it's the learnings. And I think I'm very tenacious and very resilient, but only because of those failures. It's like I call that my second MBA. I've got a formal MBA. That was my second MBA, probably far more powerful than the actual formal one, to be fair.
I'm probably sure. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you start a couple other businesses, you go and you have an events business. Is that right? And that is where you discover EOS. So what about EOS, the book traction, what made it attractive to you? And did you start to self-implement in your own company? How'd that go?
Yeah. So just before we open up the event space, so what happened was I actually was working with the Ice House, which is one of the top 10 incubators in the world over here, and I was doing a lot of work with them around startup businesses, established businesses, market validation, and I've been doing that for sort of, again, 7 years since my magic number. And while I was doing that, I saw this hole in the market for it wasn't just an event space; it was called the Entrepreneurs Playground, and so it was my concept was to bring together established entrepreneurs with startup businesses, have an environment where they could actually engage with each other. We had a bar, we had an event space, we had meeting rooms, we had it was also a bit of shared co-working space as well. And so that kind of was born out of working in the Ice House, seeing this gap in the market, opened up the event space directly across the road from the Ice House, and so was now running that as a business, plus doing the coaching, still working with the Ice House, doing some of the coaching as well. And I said when the EOS booked in to do this launch, I just saw the name and made some inquiries with Fran, who actually booked the room. She said, "Oh, look, it's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System." I was like, oh, "Okay, that sounds interesting." And she said, "Can you come to the event?" And I said, "I actually can't. I've got a client session on that day, so I can't." I was still coaching at this time, but I'd love to find out more. She said, "Well, I'll give you a couple of books." And so she gave me Traction and she gave me Get a Grip. And if I'm really honest, I tried to read Traction and I just didn't really enjoy it. It just wasn't my type of book. And I now realize I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan. I like fables, I like stories, that's how I get into it. So I almost gave up and almost went, this is a bit hard, I don't enjoy it. And then I started reading Get a Grip. And from the first page, I was completely hooked and I just read it voraciously in literally, I think, about 3 hours and went, this is amazing. And then I went back to the Traction book and went, now I see this is the how-to book. And so now I know what it's all about. The how-to book gives me the how-to. And so I started actually using some of those tools and things. I mean, I think I was already using similar methodologies, but it just gave this beautiful framework to hold it all together. And so I started implementing it into the event-based business. So looking at, our scorecards, our daily measurables, our weekly measurables, running they weren't true level 10 meetings, I now know, but, running these meetings and making sure we had the rocks. And so I suppose we self-implemented of sorts into the event-based business. But in doing this, speaking with Fran after they'd had the event, she said, "Why don't you come and be an EOS implementer?" I said, "Well, what does that entail?" She said, "Well, pretty much what you're doing now with the Ice House, the coaching, it's the teaching, it's facilitating." And I went, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." And so again, I talk a lot, but I want to put some context around it. We had just decided to actually close down that particular venue and open up a brand new venue around the corner that was almost 3 times the size. We'd proven the model,
Wow.
We knew what worked. We wanted to go and bigger and better. So this is December 2019. So we decided to close the doors December 2019. I flew across to Sydney. I did my EOS training. We had 4 months in between the old space closing down and the new space opening up. And so I thought, well, I might as well use that time. I'll go and train as an EOS implementer. I'll be able to use that in my business going forward. I can continue doing some coaching on the side. And in February 2020, the sale of the building we were actually going to be moving into fell through. And so suddenly we didn't have a space to move into. And in February 2020, it was like, oh my God, this is the end of my world. What am I going to do now? And then, of course, March 2020 happened, which was COVID.
Right.
So
you kind of a little blessing in disguise there.
we would have had a $500,000 a year lease without any ability to run any events or functions, because I don't know if you know, but New Zealand literally shut the borders. Like, we just went into complete lockdown. We had 3 months where we weren't allowed to leave our room, pretty much. I mean, it was pretty, and really in Auckland particularly, I think we had something like 362 days of lockdown in 2 years. So almost half of that time was in lockdown. So complete blessing in disguise. But as you can imagine, it was at the time it felt devastating. So then I thought, okay, well, it's a sign. I need to obviously focus on building up my practice again. I now had the EOS tools. And so I started from scratch, and that was the first. I've been running my own businesses this for 20 years, and this was the first time in 20 years where I had zero income for 3 or 4 months because the whole world shut down, nothing was happening. But now 5 years later, completely different story.
Yeah, which is just great. So you were already known in your markets and to your network as a business coach when you became an implementer. Tell me about the transition from running other businesses to joining the Ice House. Did you go through some sort of training? How did you become a coach?
So this was the really fascinating thing, and this is probably why I fell in love with EOS immediately. So the Ice House, despite being very, very well known around the world, and yes, I was very well recognized by the time I left there, they didn't actually give you any training. They didn't give you any framework. They just said, well, you've run businesses before, so just go coach other people on how to do it.
Just do that.
Yeah, just do that. And I guess, I mean, fortunately, I think I'm I was a curious child, and I'm naturally the person who likes to ask a lot of questions. So I just asked lots of questions, and I just help people to think about what the answers might be. But there was no real formal training. There was no real frameworks, which is why when I came across EOS, I just went, oh my goodness, finally, I have this framework that I can actually apply. My challenge was that EOS was not known over here. If you Google EOS over here, you get lipsticks, shoes, and cameras.
No,
now,
nice.
As a photographer, I love my Canon EOS, but it doesn't help when you're trying to tell people what it's all about. So I love the framework. I love the fact that it was something I could actually work with and start to use within businesses. But there was a big sort of transition between being recognised. I mean, I'm, again, quite fortunate. I'd been recognised one of the top 30 businesswomen in New Zealand at this point. And so people knew me as being a good business person. They knew me as being a coach, but they knew me as being more of a start-up business coach. And the businesses I now work with in EOS are much larger, more established, family, privately owned businesses. So there was quite a big transition to try and change from being known as that sort of startup business coach to now being somebody who could actually help more established businesses. And I had to also explain what EOS was. So it was a massive branding exercise. I've given away 500 traction books in my 5 years.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what do you think changed? So you're still doing some other coaching on, or just EOS?
No, I mean, I'm a family business advisor, and so I do like to specialize in family business, but I still think EOS tools. This is what I love about EOS. I think that it's people say, oh, but it won't work for my type of business. It works for every type of business. And so even though I call myself a family business advisor, I understand the dynamics of family business, but I use the EOS tools to help them get the same results. So no, I don't do any other coaching anymore. I have got a couple of businesses on the side that I am still involved in because I can't help myself. One's an AI technology company, and one is placing fractional executives into businesses. So I still keep my finger in the pie doing other things, but my majority of 90% of my life is EOS.
Yeah. So question for you. With your AI business. Now, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on AI putting a dent in the world of coaching?
This is
positive,
really
negative?
Yeah. I sit on the fence in terms of I don't think we'll ever move away from people wanting to do business with people. We saw this in the pandemic, when we were in lockdown. We all shifted to a virtual world and we did everything virtually, and it worked for a period of time. But as soon as we opened up our borders here in New Zealand, since we were able to go back out to events, people started coming back into events. They wanted to see people. I mean, there was almost like this mass sort of people going to these events again just to have that people connection. So I don't think we'll ever move away from that. I've just finished reading a book called Scary Smart by Mo Gawdat, and he was one of the top engineers at Google in their the Google lab, the laboratory that did all the fancy stuff. And so he talks about AI and it's how amazing it is, but it is really super scary smart. It has huge possibility, but it isn't a human. And I think that is the thing that, I've got a colleague that I work with who has actually created a complete virtual AI coach. They fed all the information that he has from his years of coaching and everything else. And I think it's great for answering a quick ad hoc question, but mostly we want to talk to other people. We want to engage with other people. That's what business is about. So I don't know. I think it's got huge potential. I think it can take away all the boring stuff that we don't want to do, but it's not going to.
Hopefully. Right. Yeah. Hopefully it takes all the stuff that we, moving paper from one point to another. Talk about, going into the microbiology lab and all the paperwork. It would be really useful to not have to get, because what I've found is like with, very detailed stuff, most of it's a documentation error that causes those types of things, and hopefully AI will be able to fix that. But
And from a medicine
I
point
had
of
a
view, it's going to be fascinating, right? Because it's so much more accurate than we will ever be as humans. So I think it has
oh
huge
for
potential
sure.
in the microbiology lab, in the histopathology lab, picking up things like cancers that we would not even necessarily see as a human. So yeah, I bring it on, I say, but it's not going to replace us.
Yeah, definitely. And go with the drug business in general. I worked for Johnson and Johnson. I also worked for GlaxoSmithKline Biologics. And I always had two jokes: is that the drug you take is the one not tested, because we're just using statistical analysis to assume that it's probably good. You don't test the quality of every lot or dose. You spot check. And the other thing is that when you do clinical trials, the population of the drugs you're testing is very small in relation. So there's nothing that's personalized to you and your individual DNA, your individual blood type and situation. So I think that could be a huge opportunity for personalized drugs that are meant just for you, that are probably be much more effective. So I think AI has a really interesting application in a lot of those areas. But I was having a conversation with Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach. So we're just launching a podcast called Coaching Collaboration. So it's between Strategic Coach and EOS. So Strategic Coach is the largest entrepreneurial coaching program in the world, and EOS is the largest business operating system in the world. And so we've got together and we're having conversations. And one thing that came up is AI. And our conversation led to Dan's hypothesis, Dan Sullivan, that coaching is actually the bridge between technology and people. And AI is the technology. It's really smart. It's really useful. But people don't really know what it is that they want. What do you want this thing to do? And that the role of coaching is the intermediary between people and technology. Any thoughts about that?
So it's like the business analyst, isn't it? In terms of the, when you've got people who are doing techie stuff, you always need a business analyst that translates the business stuff into what the techie stuff needs to do. And so, yeah, the coach is kind of like that role. I think that's probably true because we use AI a lot, obviously in the AI business we do, but also in our EOS practice, we'll use it to help us to write articles and to do certain things. But it's all about what you feed it. At the end of the day, it's only as smart as the inputs that get put into it. So, yeah, I like that analogy. We are there to make sure that we get the best out of the technology.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have one last question for you.
Sure.
If you, with all the clients that you've worked with, if you could just have one thing that they would get right each and every time as you're observing them running their businesses, the one thing that if they could get this thing right, they would get more of what they want from their business, what would it be?
One thing.
One thing. Can't be two, just one.
Yeah, I know. I hate that question because it makes it really difficult. I suppose business is about people, and I think we should never forget that. It's having your people all on the same page, knowing where you're headed, what you're doing, being on that page with you. We've got to focus on that. Like I said, people do business with people. We have teams of people. It's like just make sure that you're looking after your people and they'll look after you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Debra, I appreciate the conversation, and I hope everyone else enjoys the conversation as much as I did.
Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to kind of share my story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see you.
Thank you.